Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. I'm Richard Jacobs, Executive Director of the nonprofit Finding Genius Foundation and host of the Finding Genius Podcast. In late 2016, I was rear-ended at 65 miles an hour by a truck on the highway, which sent me off-road into a ditch. The impact of the collision gave me a concussion and other injuries. At the hospital, a CT scan showed that I had thyroid nodules, which turned out to be cancer. It was then, when I had a biopsy of my neck, that I realized even if I was a millionaire, I wouldn't want a second or a third biopsy due to the pain and the invasiveness of it. And appointments at that time for thyroid experts were 3 to 6 months out. And I was worried about dying now, even if that was irrational. So because of this, I've decided to raise money to conduct a literature review on steroids, on the causes of anxiety and depression, a condition that affects well over 50 million people in the United States and hundreds of millions worldwide. Our goal is to create a codex, a guide that reveals all possible treatments for anxiety and depression for people that live with the condition, or for loved ones that have it, as my wife and my son do. To find out more about our fundraiser, visit findinggeniusfoundation.org and click on current initiatives. And now to our guest.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Jen Schwartz. She's the founder and CEO of Motherhood Understood. And we're going to talk about mothers and poor mothers and their mental health, especially when they have kids. So Jen, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And I say poor mothers because I'm married and we have 3 kids, and my wife is a very tough job, so just recognizing her. And mothers everywhere.
Yes, it's a tough job.
Tell me about your background and what got you into this area of focus.
Sure. So I am the mother of an almost 9-year-old. He'll be 9 actually this Saturday. And when he was born 9 years ago, I was really excited to be a mom. I had a fairly easy, uncomplicated pregnancy. Nobody talked to me about mental health or anything like that. And the day after I brought him home from the hospital, it was like a switch flipped. And I was hit with very, very severe postpartum depression and anxiety. And I was completely blindsided by the experience because, again, nobody had ever talked to me about those things when I was pregnant. So I had no idea what was wrong with me. All I thought was that I was horrible at being a mom. I was missing the mom gene, I guess you could say, that I thought everyone else had. And I couldn't understand why I was suffering and why I was crying all the time and why I had this paralyzing anxiety all the time when I thought becoming a mother was the role that I was naturally as a woman just born for. And it took a little while to really figure out what was going on and how to get the right help. And what really the details of what happened were the day after I got home from the hospital, I started having these scary thoughts about wanting to get hurt and go back to the hospital so I didn't have to take care of my baby. And that was a huge red flag for me because I thought I was just supposed to experience magic and love and connection and joy and all of these happy, rainbows and unicorn things. And my experience was the opposite. And I had to really kind of fight to find the right therapist and to get on the right medication. And it really took a few months before I found a treatment plan that started to work. And I really didn't feel like I got to the other side of the postpartum depression until my son turned 1 year old. So I really missed most of his infancy because I was, off fighting this illness. And
that's terrible.
Yeah, it was really, really hard and it was scary. And as I started to get better, I kind of started to get angry because nobody prepared me or educated me about these illnesses, which I learned from my therapist when I first met her. And after seeing a therapist who didn't know what she was talking about and just made me feel worse, I found a therapist who specialized in postpartum depression. And she's the one that told me she has treated thousands of women like me and that these illnesses like postpartum depression and anxiety happen to hundreds of thousands of women every year, and they're completely treatable with the right professional care. And I didn't know any of this, until
so
I was in
treatable
it.
means, so how has it been characterized in medicine? What
So
what are the
I think,
causes? What are the treatments, et
right.
cetera?
So I think it's the tough thing about it is it's really not one size fits all. Every mom's experience is different. For me personally, I had crippling anxiety and I cried a lot. I really couldn't get out of bed and I barely left the house for 6 months unless I was forced to. And so treatment for me ended up being therapy sessions twice a week and going on an antidepressant for the first time. Those two things really helped, and I think got me on that path to fighting to get back to my old self and fall in love with my son and being his mom. But it took time. I mean, it wasn't really until 6 months postpartum I started to see myself again and do small things and find joy in things that I used to find joy in, like go to a yoga class or go to a concert or go on a date night with my husband, things like that. So these illnesses, when you suffer like that, they need professional treatment.
Did this get in the way of breastfeeding, or does it in the aggregate for many women?
Yes.
Or what, I know,
Yes.
I'm sure child abuse is some of the fallout, which is terrible, but what are the other fallouts from it?
Right. So, I mean, the child abuse is small. I mean, that really comes more under a diagnosis of postpartum psychosis, which is the rarest of all these illnesses. That needs to be treated right away. But for me, with postpartum depression, I never had any thoughts about wanting to harm myself or my baby or anything like that. And that's not even what postpartum depression is. But I thought I was going to be this champion breastfeeder when I was pregnant. When I had my son, I breastfed in the hospital. And after that, he really struggled to latch. And so I started pumping. But the day after I got home, the depression and anxiety had already set in, that the pumping and having to keep up with that every 3 hours really also started to take a toll on my mental health. So I actually quit breastfeeding after 5 days. It wasn't for me. It was really putting an additional strain on my mental health. And I went exclusively to formula. And for me, that was the best decision I had ever made. I know lots of moms who had postpartum depression or anxiety, and they chose to keep breastfeeding because it was the one thing they felt like they could actually give of themselves to their baby. I know plenty of moms who chose to stop because it did take a toll. I think it's kind of, one size fits all. The key is that in those situations, mom really needs to put her mental health first, not how she feeds her baby.
Yeah, the baby itself. Okay, so what if you went to a hybrid, where you pump, I don't know how many times, so there's what the baby needs, but, I know the mom's ducts fill up with milk and everything. So what would be the minimum that a new mom could pump? Maybe there's a hybrid in there, like they give formula and maybe once a day or twice a day they pump and that's enough, or is it not workable like that?
I think that you can absolutely do a combo, but I think when you have milk in, you have to still pump whether you're giving the baby that milk or not, because if you don't, your ducts get clogged and it hurts. So for me, I just let it all dry up cold turkey right away. But for moms who do both, it's still something you have to keep up with. And for some moms, even when they're struggling, they don't mind the breastfeeding, so they stick with it. Other moms, it really it takes its toll and they stop. And I think, some moms get nervous about if they're taking medication with breastfeeding, but there's plenty of safe medications to take. When you're doing that, you just have to, talk with your doctor, your psychiatrist about it. Yeah, it's not really a one size fits all. I tend to go with the fed is best, and also, mom's mental health is best, because if mom's not okay, no one's okay.
Right. Yeah, true. Okay. So you stopped after 5 days, and then what else did you have to do, or what else did you do? What did you experience on from there?
So I was very lucky that we had some part-time help. I had a baby nurse, and then we switched from that to a part-time nanny because we thought that I was just going to be a stay-at-home mom taking care of my baby every day, and I could really barely be alone with him. So our parents, who were very generous, all chipped in to help with that extra childcare because my husband had to go to work. But also, he stepped up and kind of took on a lot of the parenting when I couldn't do it. We had family members coming to stay with us to help out because I really spent most of my time in bed. I could barely get out of bed. The anxiety was so crippling. It was like an elephant was sitting on your chest, and it was really hard to do anything. I would go outside and walk my neighborhood because the walking would actually, the movement would help. And then other than that, I really would, I had a friend who came over most days and she would sit with me and the baby. I would try to go through the motions of taking care of my son, but, usually someone was with me, whether it was my mom or my mother-in-law or my sister or a friend or the nanny. And I went to therapy twice a week, to talk through all this. And eventually it got better with time. Like I said, at about 6 months, I started to see some light, and I started to voluntarily give my son a bath. I put him in the stroller and I took him for a walk to the park alone. I didn't fake a smile out with my husband one night at a concert, and all those first kind of turned into seconds and thirds. And then before I knew it, I was feeling better and just I was a mom. It didn't happen overnight. It was a process.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Do you describe it as an illness, or is that what's told by medical literature? I mean, like when you give birth, your body's been going under, has undergone tremendous change over 9 months. Now all of a sudden you give birth and your body's gone under big time change. So I would think there'd be tremendous amounts of adjustments. Why call it an illness? Why not look at it as a different way that, what has changed now that you've given birth? I know it's not your job to study everything, but how come people aren't studying that and seeing like, okay, all these things change, maybe the microbiome shifts, all this other stuff shifts. And now to help some people get back to their previous state, they need this supplementation or this or that or the other.
Right. It's a good question. I think that no matter what, there's a huge shift and a change for a woman after she gives birth. I think it's mind and body shattering no matter what. But I do think that there are women and, there are thousands upon thousands of women who the extent of what they feel and the intensity and the impact that it has on their everyday functioning and their ability to take care of themselves and the baby after the baby comes does put it in that mental health illness category. I don't think that it doesn't happen to everyone. I don't even think that you need a specific diagnosis to say I have a baby and it's hard and I'm struggling. But I do think that, just like any other depression or anxiety or OCD or bipolar, these things are very real and they need medical, and a lot of them need medical treatment. I know thousands of women who had to go on medication, and go to therapy and things like that as if they had any other. Right. So I do think that they are illnesses. I don't think that everybody gets them.
I mean, well, actually, do you think is there a correlation between the difficulty of a pregnancy and postpartum effects? Like, do women that have difficult pregnancies, a lot of nausea or other problems, have less of it, and vice versa? Women that have easy pregnancies have this issue?
There absolutely can be. So I didn't know this when I was pregnant, but there are tons of risk factors for having postpartum depression or anxiety or any of the other perinatal mental health illnesses. A difficult pregnancy is one of them. I mean, again, there's no one size fits all. I had a ton of risk factors I didn't know about. I mean, if you have a history of mental illness in your family, that's a risk factor. If you've gone through a miscarriage or infertility, that's a risk factor. Yes, major nausea, hyperemesis, all of that can be a risk factor. Having an unsupportive partner, moving, right before you have the baby, moving to a new place, where you don't have family, all of these are risk factors. I was
hoping it would be the opposite, where if you have a difficult pregnancy, at least thank God you have an easier time after. But it sounds like you're saying they go together.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Yeah, sometimes, so I had a fairly easy pregnancy. my labor wasn't so easy. I labored for 24 hours, pushed for 2, and then had a C-section. And that there's a correlation between that, and what happened to me also. So I think it's hard to know. I think that's why I'm always kind of preaching the best thing you can do is just educate women and their partners before the baby comes, so they're at least aware that, there are risk factors and that these things can happen. And in the event that they do, this is how you treat it.
So what is your role right now in helping people with this issue? What have you chosen?
So I run an online community and platform called Motherhood Understood, where we offer resources and support and connection and community to women and their families, so no mother has to go through a mental health illness like I did alone or in isolation or feeling ashamed. Because one of the things that happened to me when I was struggling is that I felt deeply ashamed, and I didn't want anyone to know what was going on because I didn't know it was so common. So when I got better, I actually started writing about my story and sharing really intimate details of what I went through. And in turn, so many women started opening up and sharing their experiences with me. And now I run an Instagram community of over 110,000 women where we share, again, education and quotes and stories that moms send in. So I share stories written by other moms who've had similar experiences, really just with the idea that stories are how we combat the shame of all this and to help moms feel understood and seen and to normalize all these feelings of struggle once you have a baby.
Are the moms up to participating in the groups? Like, what if they're so down and out that, do you have for people that are very, very, very affected, is there baby steps or a way to put their toe in the water to start engaging at a small level?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, one thing you can do is just read you can just read what is posted. You don't have to comment or like or anything like that. I have moms who will, send me messages or emails, asking questions, reaching out where they can start, to look for help. And I always answer those, because I love, the most satisfying part of all of this is being able to hook a mom up with, a therapist or point her in the right direction to start feeling better. And then a lot of times what just happens is they see comments or they see the memes that we post on our Instagram account, or they read another mom's story. And what happens is it just kind of gives them the courage to realize or speak out and tell someone, anyone, their partner or friend, a family member, that they're struggling and they need to do something about it.
What point do people reach out? Do they reach out when they're in the middle of postpartum depression, or they reach out early in the pregnancy? Like, where do you put the lines in the water to find people to help them?
So it varies. I have community members, I think, in all areas. I have women who are pregnant, women who are pregnant with their first. Then you have women who, honestly, on the other side of it, that are just there, I think, for moral support or because, things that we post resonate with them and what they've been through. And then we definitely have lots of moms who are in the thick of it, and seeing that they're not alone really helps.
What other factors correlate with this being, a super difficult experience or not so bad? Or, does this happen less with the second child or a third? Like, what are some of the other risk factors?
So the statistics are that if you had it with one child, you're at a 50% higher chance of having it with your next. But again, there's no, definitive science. I know people who had it I have a friend who had it with her first and she did not have it with her second or third. I have a friend, I know a mom who did not have a mental health illness or issue with her first, but she had it with her second. I know parents who've had it with all 2 or 3 or however many of their children. So yes, if you've had it before, you're definitely at a higher risk to have it again. We also, at Motherhood Understood, we like to talk about what you can do to kind of set yourself up for a better situation next time. You can't prevent it, but you can have supports in place, to minimize what it will be like the next time around.
Yeah, that's good. And what about the mothers that, from what I've heard, a very high number of people, or a significant percentage, do not respond to SSRIs and antidepressant drugs. So what do those women do?
Yeah, it's hard. There are antidepressants that are not SSRIs. There are other options to try. There's different forms of therapy like EFT and EMDR and things like that. I'm not super well versed in the alternative, medicine, just because medication works for me. But there are people who do talk about that. I'm sure there's herbal supplements, CBD. I know moms who will take CBD, things like that. And again, there's other things too, just as simple as getting outside, getting sunlight, having a little bit of a social network that you can commiserate with, going to a support group, again, finding a therapist. So there are other non-medication things that you can be doing.
Are there scientific papers that are, and research that's being done on postpartum, or is it pretty sparse?
Yes. So I would say it's sparse, but there is research, and there is even a really great study that's going on out of UNC Chapel Hill called PPD. I want to say it's called PPD Act. And what they're basically doing is getting moms who have struggled with postpartum depression actually are submitting their DNA samples to the study. And they're studying postpartum depression to see, if there are genetic markers, and if there will be, a way to treat it, or treat it based on your genetic makeup. I think kind of what they're doing with certain cancers, they have started this type of research, but no, it is not as prevalent, as with other illnesses, for sure.
So what's in the near future for your organization over the next year or a couple of years? What's your goals?
So right now, just kind of maintaining what's been going on, just making sure to post stories and content, stay in communication with women. I'm hoping that now that COVID is kind of descending and we're kind of moving away from it, there's going to be more in-person events. I was doing a lot of in-person events and speaking before COVID. So I'm looking forward to that picking back up. And I think eventually maybe releasing a book. We'll kind of see.
Okay, excellent. So where can people get access to the group that are listening? How do they find it?
So the website is motherhood-understood.com. And then you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Motherhood Understood, all one word.
Very good. Well, Jen, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I know it's an important issue, and I know it's not talked about very much by most people. So appreciate you bringing it to light.
Thank you so much.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.